The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Black Ravens and Gods. Hey everybody, how you doing? We're coming up on the end of the year, and I've done almost all of the December content, including a 2-hour video that I recorded earlier today. We're mere hours away from 2024. This video is not presented as deeply serious. It's a bit of a curiosity, a little bit of a palate cleanser after doing a 2-hour video earlier today that might be a bit too much for people. Here's my big disclaimer. This is not presented as a serious argument for the non-existence of gods. This is a first draft of a possible argument, but it's mostly presented as food for thought, a little bit of palate cleanser, and for criticism. I don't claim that it's original to me, though I don't recall hearing it or seeing it in this form. And it could have some obvious flaw that I just missed in my zeal to engage with this logical curiosity. As something that stems from a potential paradox, it may turn out to be wrong or useless, but I found it curious to think about. And after everything else that I did this month, I kind of wanted to put this out there and present it. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, there's something called the Raven paradox, or Hempel's paradox. It came out about in the 1940s from Carl Gustav Hempel, who was a mathematician, logician, philosopher. And it has to do with how logical inferences in the contrapositive form might result in a paradox. It's debatable as to whether or not it even counts as a paradox. I'm not sure that it does, because it has more to do with our assumptions about the nature of evidence and what qualifies as evidence and what shouldn't. There's nothing paradoxical about the contrapositive. I mean, this is just modus tollens rule of inference. And so what we know is that for a given logical inference, if P, then Q, for that conditional statement, its contrapositive, which is if not Q, then not P, is logically equivalent to the inference. So if you say if P, then Q, that is logically equivalent to if not Q, then not P. Let's put some content in for our P's and Q's so that it makes a little bit more sense. If something is a raven, then that something is black. That statement is logically equivalent to, if it is not the case that that something is black, then it is not the case that that something is a raven. We don't have to make it quite that complicated. I just wanted to make sure that the wording was exact across the board. Basically, you can reword both of those as this. If it's a raven, it's black. And if it's not black, it's not a raven. You can substitute whatever conditionals you like to make it more clear. If I'm in my bedroom, then I'm in my house. And if I'm not in my house, then I'm not in my bedroom. How could I possibly be in my bedroom if I'm not even in my house, when house is the superset and bedroom is the subset? Similarly, if black animals or black things is the superset, then ravens are a subset. And so if it's not black, it's not a raven. It may be other things, but it's not a raven. You can use an Euler diagram, Venn diagram, however you like, where you have a superset and a subset. We know that the contrapositive is true if the inference is true. So if it is true that all ravens are black, then the entire set of things that are ravens are in the set of things that are black. And if you find a black raven, that counts as a point of data towards accepting the claim, all ravens are black. It doesn't prove it on its own. You may never be able to prove it on its own. That's not the point. If in fact it is the case that all ravens are black, then every black raven you find is one more data point. It's not an exhaustive demonstration. That also, though, means that everything you find that is not black and is not a raven is also a single piece of evidence for the claim all ravens are black. If you find a red apple, that's not black and it's not a raven. So that bit of data also supports the claim that all ravens are black. This is where the paradox comes in, or where the problem comes in, because our view of evidence is that if you find a black raven, of course you have more information that all ravens are black, but you haven't conclusively demonstrated that all ravens are black. But why would finding a red apple be evidence that all ravens are black? Just because what? Well, it's because it's the logical contrapositive. And there are a lot of attempted solutions to this, but via modus tollens, every non-black thing we find that is not a raven is also a piece of evidence for the black raven proposition. A black raven supports if it's a raven, it's black, and a red apple supports if it's not black, it's not a raven, which is logically equivalent. I said logically identical at some point earlier and had to correct myself. When you get into analyzing these logical claims, being precise about your language is important. Also, make sure that where you're putting the not or the negator is important as well, because if you said no ravens are white and then tried to do the contrapositive for that, you would get no white things are not non-ravens, which can just wind up being confusing. So why am I talking about this at all? If the proposition all ravens are black is out there and we're looking for data points to try to confirm this conditional proposition, we want to know, is this true? Every black raven we find is evidence that it's true. And somewhat paradoxically, every green fire hydrant we find is evidence that all ravens are black, as are red apples, as are blue bananas, or, not that you're necessarily going to find one of those, but who knows? Every non-black, non-raven thing is more evidence that all ravens are black. Now, I'm not going to try to resolve this paradox or this apparent paradox, and it may not be one, but it seems wrong to us intuitively to count a red apple as evidence that all ravens are black. It seems intuitively obvious that a blue car or any other non-black thing shouldn't tell us at all whether or not all ravens are black, but it's logically equivalent. Now, there's plenty of potential proposed solutions to this. Perhaps when it comes to evidence, we should only be counting actual ravens, actual things that are contained in the proposition with both things. We should count all the ravens that are black, and if we find a raven that's not black, well, a single one demonstrates that the proposition that all ravens are black is false. Perhaps there's a Bayesian analysis to this, which is one of my favorite potential resolutions to this, where, yes, there's no paradox here, and every single thing that you find that is non-black and not a raven counts as evidence towards the proposition that all ravens are black. But because there are seemingly approaching, the number of non-black, non-ravens approaches infinity, then each one of them is negligible. It's a vanishingly small. It's like you could have 1 billion of those items and you still wouldn't have a significant data set to confirm that all ravens are black. You're never going to be able to confirm that all ravens are black till you can exhaustively explore all ravens, or if you just have it as an esoteric definition. Feel free to go exploring, because it's a fascinating look into logic and epistemology, but that's not the reason that I'm doing a video on it. Consider this. All ravens are black. The contrapositive, all non-black things are non-ravens. Now let's change 2 words. All gods are fictional. The contrapositive would be all non-fictional things are not gods. So every non-fictional apple you find that's also not a god, that's a data point that all gods are fictional. And every non-fictional raven you find that is not a god is another data point that all gods are fictional. Every god that you find that is fictional is a data point that gods are fictional. And so if every God we find that is fictional is a data point for gods being fictional, just as every black raven we find is a data point for all ravens being black, and every non-fictional non-god you find is also evidence that all gods are fictional, just as every non-black non-raven you find is a data point or evidence for the proposition that all ravens being black. I'm non-fictional, and I'm not a god, which means that I am evidence that all gods are fictional. And if you exist and you're not a god, so are you. And so is every other human being on the planet that exists and is not a god, and every other human being that has ever existed and is not a god, and every grain of sand that's existed and is not a god, and every planet and every star and every mote of dust, and every atom that has ever existed that is not a god is another data point against gods. It's another data point that all gods are fictional. So, what's your take on Hempel's paradox? Do you think it's a paradox at all? Do you think there's a solution or a resolution? Do you have a resolution that refutes my claim that I am evidence that all gods are fictional? Leave your solution down in the comments. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.